No. The farming crisis is happening all over Europe. We've seen tractors all over the place doing amazing things, trying to get people interested in what they shove in their mouths, and it doesn't just come out of the ground as a worm or an insect or a bug that we know that the WEF are very keen for us to have in the future, or that we don't actually have any animals anymore because they're farting all over the place and causing too much CO2. Which is, of course, the gas of life which makes everything grow, including us. And without it, we wouldn't be here. So I thought, finally, because I'm hoping to go into this area myself and taking you with me, is that I ought to talk to a farmer and find out what is going on. And who better, who is placed to know what's going on, other than, of course, the Bowler Hat Farmer. You can find him on YouTube at the Bowler Hat Farmer. But in the meantime, he's here. Hello, Mark Byford.
Richard, good morning. How are we, sir?
I'm very, very well. Thank you very much. Although I keep looking up at the sky and I see that the chemtrails and the geoengineering is out there, the leaden skies and the horrible stuff can't be very good for farming and growing at the moment.
No, it's not, Richard. I can't emphasise enough just how bad it is. I mean, I'm looking out the window here today. I would normally be out in the field, but we are at the situation at present where we're completely underwater. We've been, rained off for months and months and months. And it's quite thick clay where we farm. So it's just quagmire the whole time. We get one day where it's nice. We fortunately had a break where we had 2 mornings where there was frost, so we could at least get a tractor on the ground. But the predominance is that it's just waterlogged everywhere.
And is this typical for, because people's memories, when it comes to winter, they'll go, oh, but it's winter, isn't it? Is this typical for February?
Well, whilst it might be, what I will say is it's the highest rainfall we've known in Suffolk for years upon years upon years. If Anglia Water dare turn around and tell me this year there's a water shortage, I will be surprised.
Yes. You think all our reservoirs must fill up. Not that I think they ever build any new reservoirs, but they're very quick on building new houses everywhere.
Yeah,
but anyway,
absolutely.
Another incident. So tell us about the sort of farming that you do and where you are within the whole... you see, it's called an industry now, isn't it? And
it is.
And curiously, I love reading the old books from the 1930s about farming, and I've been reading it. And to me, it seems like it's a way of life that it used to be, with traditions and farmers helping one another. But as soon as you make it an industry, it seems like a very competitive, business-focused type thing. Loses a bit of the charm. But anyway, tell us where you are in all of this.
It's interesting you say about competition because, most farmers, their competition might be their neighbour. And they don't really go any further than that. So, okay, let me tell you a bit about my background. So my background, I am a farming family person, come from a background of farmers. My granddad was a cattle dairy farmer. My dad's family were agricultural engineers within the farming community and had thrashing engines and big ploughs with steam engines, what they took from farm to farm. And employed hundreds of people to do that. From my side, I was given a bit of a baptism of fire in the farming side. At 11 years old, I decided I was a big boy and I was going to go and get a job on a pig farm. And, I was not very long before I was 16 and helping to run the farm, went off to university, got those pieces of important paper that said, I was qualified to go and do the job. I've spent all my life either doing the farming or have been doing the wholesale fruit and veg side. So at present, I am a coordinator with the Land Workers Alliance in East Anglia, looking after nearly 250 members of the Land Workers Alliance, which are all small organic growers, looking after them and helping supporting them. I've got 20 acres of land that I look after myself, which is part of the family farm, a small section of that, and another 16 acres I farm elsewhere. And I'm a full-time, because I'm looking for something to do, fruit and veg wholesaler for a company called Just Picked down in East Anglia. So I've got a fairly broad spectrum of the whole industry. And that's one of the things I think that, in my opinion, allows me to have a voice of what I believe are the things what need to come to the attention of the general public and of the farmers, because I'm shocked, Richard, still, despite all the facts what are coming out about net zero, it's a bit like the jibby jabs. It's the facts are coming out about net zero, and farmers are just oblivious to it. The biggest percentage of farmers, I feel, are very much sleepwalking into the crisis, which is definitely 100% occurring. So that's me and where I fit in.
No, it's interesting you say it, because Julia and I went to Groundswell, which is a farming, I think they called it a farming festival. So it's sort of a smallish farming. It's not like a big agricultural thing where you go and you see all the pigs and they're doing all the auctions and stuff, which is great fun. And there was a lot of a big agricultural presence of all their tractors, not all their tractors, but a number of the big impressive looking tractors, all looking very shiny and all of that. A lot of seed producers out there and all of that. And so much of this was carbon offsetting here and all that sort of net zero targeting here. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, okay, but where's the actual, let's talk about growing food then, not you could offset this and grow trees, or you can have lovely solar panels all over your land and the rabbits can sort of run around underneath it all, getting probably radiated, I don't know what. But one chap came up to me and he said, I'm a farmer. I'm a small-scale farmer. He said, and you know, some of the big farmers are here represented. And he said, but he said they don't know they're growing food. They think of it as a commodity.
Commodity, yeah.
And so they grow their rapeseed oil seeds or whatever it is, and it disappears out the gate. That's the last they ever see of it.
Yes.
And then they start the cycle again. And I thought, that was a wake-up call to me, because I thought at least farmers must know. And he said they don't, if you've got a whole load of beef cattle, they don't go to the local restaurant and eat their beef that's been cooked by, a nice chef.
Yeah.
And that does seem to be a huge problem.
Yeah, I think, Richard, there's two sides to that, really. We have one, the farmers they see it as a commodity 100%. They don't see it as the raw product, as a fruit and veg meat. And that has two issues as far as I'm concerned. One, the attachment to it as a commodity is very different to the attachment to it as food. I believe personally that I'm 56, Richard, so I'm guessing I'm a similar age to yourself. In our time, food has been removed completely from people's psyche. So they're taught to go to a supermarket and buy a box. The box contains what they're going to eat. They take it home, put it in the microwave for 3 minutes, eat it. The job's done. Chuck the packaging away, and you don't think about it again. Unlike someone like myself, who would be in the position where I've grown the food, or taken some a meat that has gone off of the farm, gone to a local abattoir, been turned into meat, come back, put it in the freezer or the fridge, whatever that might be. And when you eat it, the provenance of it, the quality, that the pig was called Fred, and and as much as
and you know what he's at.
Yeah, and you know exactly where you are, and I think that's been deliberately taken away from people. And the farmers, I have to say that. So when you get, sort of a lot of the farmers that I interact with are, we have about 500 farmers on the wholesale side that we have access to, and that's predominance of small farmers and growers. Once you get onto the bigger farmers, they just see, their potatoes. I've got one friend who's a potato farmer, and he says, "Oh, we don't grow anything. We just mine potatoes." and that sums it up. That's the kind of the mindset that some of these bigger estates have got, and that's bloody worrying. This is the food, what gives us life, and when you've got it down to it's just a commodity, you don't care how you grow it, you don't care how it's produced, you don't care what it goes through, what chemicals are put on it, whatever that might look. And I'm not slating big farmers here, Rich. That's not the case at all. There is a place for big farming. I don't agree with perhaps a lot of the practices they've got. However, there is a place for it. But I do think that between government initiatives, supermarkets, and farming policy, we have taken this vast amount of knowledge of food and got it right down this tight little funnel. And the drip, what comes out of the bottom, is the knowledge which you're given in school to understand food. and I think that we need to be in a position that we get back to giving people that sovereignty of food, so they fully understand what food actually is. So, my kids were brought up on vast amounts of fruit and veg. I know my grandchildren still have vast amounts of fruit and veg because that's been passed down generational. And that, I think, is what's missing from the community as a whole now.
Yes, and I was just wondering then, as you were speaking there about these big estates, which often are run by a management team, very, on a schedule and on sort of computerized policy rather than actually walking about the old farm and looking around and seeing how things are. I just wondered if at the end of their day they go down to a supermarket and eat from a box which they have no idea where the provenance is themselves, having mined
Probably.
potatoes all day long.
Yeah, probably.
Which is so sad. And the other thing is that this is really such a very short time this has come about since the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And all, within one generation, one long generation, but you could say 2 generations, I suppose, that here we are where people no longer gather around the table. They no longer sort of break bread together and share that one meal and appreciate that whoever's cooked it. I mean, the other thing is people have forgotten how to cook and take those raw ingredients.
Yeah. Sure.
And I think that's all part and parcel of it, of the commodirizing. That's not the word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The turning food into a commodity.
Yeah.
And not something that is an integral part of that life's enjoyment. Because when you do go to have a lovely piece of steak or some fresh fruit and veg, and you taste the difference, the experience is so different than sort of just shoveling fuel into your face.
Yeah, it's interesting, Richard. I did a video the other day which went up on the No Farmers No Food Twitter feed, and it went out to about 130,000 people, and it was me eating my breakfast, and it was just simply a cake I'd picked up from a local bakery, Bardwell's bakery, the Worcester's Bakery in Bardwell, and I'd picked it up and I said, look, this is a breakfast that I've got. It wasn't a very healthy breakfast, obviously it's a sugary cake, but I appreciate that. But it had, the British flour and the British butter and the British dairy cream inside and the British rhubarb on top, and it had British sugar sprinkles on top of that. And it was, look, just to make that one thing, we need 4 or 5 farmers. And people don't understand that anymore. They just go, I just grabbed a cake and ate it and I had my breakfast. That's the end of the conversation. For me, when I broke it down, and I think that video has, had something like sort of 15, 20,000 views on Facebook as well, and about 1,000 likes. And you look at that and you think, that says to me that's hit a raw nerve with people. And the people commenting on that video have all said the same thing. Crikey, even people like my mum who have gone and watched the video and went, oh God, I forgot about that. My mum's a competent cook. She was a chef most of her life. So, for someone like that to say that, and most of the comments on the video were from school, from teachers and nursery people and grandparents and things like that. It wasn't from the farming community. This wasn't just in the raw general public saying, wow, I haven't thought about food like that for a long time. And
we've been made so busy with our busy lives trying to
pay the bills,
and we're off out early, and food on the go, and all these places that will deliver stuff to you we know all the names, and you can text this stuff and it just arrives.
Sure.
And you have no notion. So obviously some farmers are clearly worried about this. Some big estate farmers perhaps are not, because they've bought into this and they don't realise that they're also going to be hit down the line. What are farmers doing? What is the sort of word on the street?
Okay, I think there's 3 things to cover here, Richard. One is the fact of the net zero policy. So the 3 things that I think sit under the umbrella of why farmers, and I'm sure that most of your viewers will be aware of what's going on in Europe at present in the farming community. There is a massive backlash against the WEF's policies. And what has happened is you've got 3 major things. One, the net zero policy. That is, even the farmers that accept that carbon is an issue in the atmosphere, because of what they've been led to believe. I personally don't. They're going to be affected if they believe or don't believe. So they can, do what I did, go research it, and you don't have to dig very deep to realise that it isn't true. That's a big issue, because a lot of the policies that are being brought down by the government are all about giving up good quality agricultural land to plant pretty flowers or, nice green trees. Well, I know when I had a point in my life, Richard, where I was very hungry and I'd got small children, pretty flowers weren't going to feed them.
No.
And nor were the leaves off an oak tree. So, I think farmers, whether they realise or not at the moment, that is going to be a huge issue. Okay. So, secondly, we have the issue of the overall cost of running a farm. So with basic wages going up, with the cost of implements going up, agricultural equipment, you can soon look at 250 to 400,000 for a tractor. Then on top of that, you look at the fuel costs. During the start of the pandemic, we had red diesel at 20 pence a litre. Now you're talking £1 a litre. So that's gone up 5 times. Cost of the electricity to run the grain silos, to run the dairy, to run the chicken houses, whatever that might be, has all gone up, obviously. So the cost of running the farm has escalated out of all control. And that runs into the next one. Now, this is the one bit of the chain that I can openly speak about because I'm not part of it, and that is the supermarket section of this. So you have the farmer and you have the consumer, and in the middle you have everything that's more or less owned by the supermarkets. So whether that's the pack houses, the production companies that produce, so let's say like Kellogg's, someone like that, who takes a raw ingredient, turns it into someone else, puts it in a box and sends it to Tesco's or another supermarket. And so you end up with that issue that all of the money is in the middle.
Yes.
If you take, I won't say who, but one of the supermarkets, said they earned 2.7 billion last year. Well, good for them. The public didn't save that, and the farmers didn't earn that. So that says to me that there's a problem in the middle. Most of the farmers who supply into the supermarket supply chain are terrified to say anything because of the implications of the actions against them. So what happened was, Richard, prior to the pandemic, you had farmers going into contracts with supermarkets that could afford, at the prices they were paying to run the farm, they could afford to run the contracts. Now the cost of running the farm's gone up here, and suddenly they're losing money hand over fist on the contract. So at present, most of the supermarkets pay in between 32 pence and 36 pence to buy a litre of milk off the farm. Now, that costs any farm a point of production of 42 pence. So every time the tanker goes up the drive, the farm loses money. They're stuck in a contract for 18 months, 3 years, whatever that might be left on the contract. They can't get out of it. So what are their options? Just keep getting further and further and further into debt to supply a contract that you don't want to supply anyway.
How does, just to interject there, how does this advantage the supermarkets if you start basically bankrupting farmers who then can no longer supply the supermarket?
Richard, I wish I knew the answer to that, because we've watched them do this over the past 40 years. Some years ago, I used to deal with a lovely Spanish family who owned a tomato farm. And we used to rock up there every week, get a pallet of tomatoes for the wholesale side, come away, pay them on the dot there and then in cash. And then they started supplying, then that was Sainsbury's who they started supplying. And within 6 months, Sainsbury's hadn't paid them a penny. They went into receivership, and Sainsbury's happily bought the farm and let them manage the farm on their behalf. And I have seen hundreds of farmers end up in this position up and down the country. Hundreds. So they it doesn't make any difference to them if the farm goes under.
Right.
They can step in, they can put a management company in there. It just becomes part of the wheel that constantly churns for them. And I think that's really worrying. I think, we've seen in the past few years that, for instance, a particular computer engineer bought up lots of land across America. And I know he's a specialist in farming and
medical interventions,
and things like that. For instance,
amazing things. He looked out of a window one day and came up with this concept, and he's used to viruses of some description, I understand.
So I kind of look at, and people have said to me, somebody like that wouldn't invest that much money in farming. Well, if you want to reduce the amount of food on the planet, because you have an alternative solution to feed the people, right? Then just buy the land and don't grow anything. Yes. Don't rent it out to anybody else, and don't let anyone else go on it. And before you know where you are, you've got a massive shareholding in land, and you're controlling the narrative. And people will eat whatever they can get hold of if you end up giving them no other option.
Or as the other option, as you just said, is to have incentives for those people who've got the land to grow flowers or put loads of trees on it.
Absolutely, and we're seeing so much of it. I mean, Richard, under the new ELMS policy, which has just come out from DEFRA for the England side of things, farmers can get up to £250 an acre not to do anything. If they grow an acre of wheat, they might come out earning £30-40. So what farmer in their right is not going to take the money? And that's the scary bit, because that's the bit where I've always thought to myself, I first got told about the 2030 agenda when I was 21. And a friend of mine who was very awake at the time, before the internet, said to me about it. And I laughed it off for a year, and a year it took him to get me to take it serious. And when I did and looked into it, and I thought to myself, this cannot be right, and this won't work anyway, because farmers are always going to want to produce food. Until now you look at it and you get to sort of 2024, they've got them so backed into a corner with the financial commitments they've got, that the only way they can pay those commitments are to take an incentive scheme that pays them not to grow food. Well,
and who's supplying the money of that incentive scheme?
Well, I know who I think it's coming from, but it's coming down from DEFRA and via the British government. But who's giving it to the British government?
That's my point. It's us, isn't it? In the taxes.
Well, I would say there is that. I think there's also the other side that when you control the money, you can spend as much as you like, because you just print some more and it doesn't matter anyway, does it? I've always said this about people saying, don't pay your council tax. Well, it doesn't really matter if you pay it or not, because they can just print some more at the bequest of the government and say, there you go. And we fulfil the interest on that payment. So, I think they're the three things which is kind of in a small overview of the farming community. And within each one of those, if you take, let's say, the cost, that will vary from farm to farm. You might have 1,000 different implications within there of that. So, when people ask farmers, well, what's your problem? They say, well, that's not what the last farmer told me. Well, no, they're not, because every farm's unique. One might be a hill farmer, like someone like Gareth Frith-Jones. He's on top of the hills. We farm down in, arable land in East Anglia. So every farm has difference of what animals they've got, what crops they grow, and anything else. So I think the challenges what's sitting there for the general public are astronomical. So we've seen in the past year that the prices of food, in the past 4 years, for instance, have, skipped. The government quite happily tells us that inflation on food has run at, possibly 4 to 5% over the course of the last 4 years. Well, try 50%. You might probably over that 5 years would probably be more closer to the fact. And within that, the public are getting screwed by the supermarkets without realising. And people say, oh, well, I could go to a farm and buy the meat, but they're so expensive. Well, it's not. The farmer's selling it at what he needs to sell it at. The supermarket are quite happily selling it at a reduced cost because they've screwed the farmer over for the money, so they can afford to do that. You know, so the public are getting screwed without realising they're being screwed. So the belief is that the supermarkets are doing them a favour, where really the supermarket is the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest issue within the food supply section.
Yes, and I would agree with you there very much. I know that the Prime Minister has been talking to the National Farmers Union, and I know you wanted to comment on that. How is good old Rishi on our side? Is he a farmer's boy, helping to grow stuff for everybody? I'm sure he goes to his allotment at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And instead of counting all the money he's made, he's planting some carrots.
He sings a good song. Let's put it like that. He stood up at the National Farmers Union and did a really good speech. And I haven't met one farmer to date as yet that said anything positive about the speech, only, well, that was great lip service. Bang on the dot if we're going to have in early May an election. It was bang on the money then to be able to say, here's all the things, you know, which we're going to put right in the farming community for one reason and one reason only, in my opinion.
Mm.
If you look at Europe at the minute and see the carnage what farmers are causing, what lengths would you go to as the Prime Minister to try and stop that happening on your own soil? Now, bearing in mind that it's happened in every solitary country across Europe, do I see that happening here? I don't think there'll be any other option for the farmers by the time we get to the end of this. Because, you know, you've got Rishi going on there. And one of the great points he made in there was he's made £70 million available for robotics on farms. Now, most of the robots, what you would need to put on these farms, you'd probably have a couple of these sort of land-based robots, and they work on a computer system, which is £1 million. Okay?
Right.
He's made 70 million available, so that's 70 farms out of the 104,000 farms which are available for the funding. Now, you have to spend the money up front and then claim it back. So there could be a few of the farmers who don't get their cash back.
Oh, gosh. Right. Bloody hell.
So, you know, people think when they watch that speech, oh, he's made £70 million available to the farmers. That's an awful lot of money. But it isn't. It really isn't when you look at it. You know, had they have said we're going to put £70 million into, you know, making sure more farm shops are built, or, you know, giving that money to farmers to achieve, you know, food production, you would look at it and go, okay, well, I can see that. For robotics, really, when we've got how many, probably 8 million people in the country unemployed, you know, on statistics. So surely we should be getting people back to work, and then those taxes go to help the country survive, not paying robots that, no, just...
Exactly. And is automation the answer for farming?
I think there's two aspects here, Richard. One is the fact that, do people, younger people especially, want to go into farming to do general things like fruit picking, for instance? When we were kids, you know, mums would go out and do fruit picking. Where we were, there was massive fruit farms were around where we are, which are now all grubbed out, all gone. They grubbed them out at the same time they were paying the Polish to put them in, and then later paid the Polish to take theirs out to put them in France, you know. And so... but parents used to go fruit picking, the kids used to go with them. We could help mum for, you know, 15, 20 minutes before we got bored, and then we'd help again a little bit later, and mum earned an extra £1 at the end of the day as a result of what we'd done as well. That's all gone. People haven't been brought through the system in the last 20, 30 years to do that. You know, I mean, my youngest recollection of being on the farm certainly with my mum, was her and a load of her friends were rhubarb picking, and it was thick snow on the fields. We were kind of 5 or 6 men, all my friends, huddled under a big trailer on the field with loads of bales all piled around us and straw on the floor. We were just playing under the trailer. They'd set a campfire out just outside for us to keep warm. And, you know, I think back to what my mum went through to put food on the table then, Richard, of where she was bent over pulling rhubarb in thick snow. You know, I'm talking about a foot deep snow on the field as it was coming up the field.
Yeah.
Can you see people doing that now? I probably can't. They tell us we can't have the amount of so Polish, Lithuanians and so forth coming into the country who are prepared to do that. But if they're prepared to do that and pay taxes in this country, surely then we would do that. I don't know. But I don't think automation, certain things, don't get me wrong, of course there is jobs what need automation. I don't think that weeding a field is down to automation. I think that's just down to getting enough bodies on a field. If you've got 8 million people unemployed, make them work for the unemployment benefit. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, but I think you're absolutely right. People have lost that sense of what survival means.
Yes.
And if we're told that actually, you can still sit in front of screens, but you'll just have to eat more synthetic rubbish, I think a lot of people will unfortunately vote for that because they haven't understood what food is. And getting them to actually have a proper decent meal, have nutritious food that is actually keeping them well, so they're not then reliant on Big Pharma for all these pills and things. I mean, everything is integrated, and this does seem to be a very clever ruse on behalf of these people who've thought it through.
Absolutely.
But we're all fighting against that. So you talk about a pink elephant in the room. Shall we get on to what this pink elephant is?
Okay, I've brought this up on several meetings over the past months, and the pink elephant, as far as I'm concerned, will come to play in the next few weeks, I believe. Pink elephant's been all over Europe. Farmers have got out in masses. They have gone out with military precision in big equipment that is a job to reckon with when you get it en masse. If you get sort of 10,000 tractors piling into a city, then they can very soon take control of the place without the police being able to do anything about it, just because
you'd need tanks, wouldn't you, in the end? And then that's a bad look.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's in the military the other day, and ex-tank commander. And I said, and I said, how many? He said, the tractors won't make any difference. And I said, well, how many tanks has the British Army got that are based in the UK? He said, probably about 50. Oh, right. And we've got about. And I'm no expert, but I'm going to guess there must be 600,000 tractors in the UK. So you kind of look at it and think to yourself, I'm not very good at maths, Richard, but I think the numbers are stacked up in the farmers, on the farmers' side, and that's what they've found in Europe. If it gets to the point that the masses of farmers do decide to go out, wouldn't it be great to sit here, Richard, now and be able to say, I genuinely believe that the government will stop, look, listen, take on board and deal with the situation that farmers are unhappy. Did that happen in Europe? No. So the farmers went out and protested. And, 6 weeks on, are still protesting, despite the fact that the EU has agreed to bow down to most of their demands. The farmers clearly do not believe that because they're still out. So that says to me that the time for the politicians has kind of passed. And I think that's where we are here. I have to say that I know I speak about Gareth quite a bit. He's someone I look up to in the farming community. He announced the other day that next Wednesday that the farmers will go to Cardiff, and I'm part of that on social media, and they are organising vast amounts of equipment and vast amounts of public as well to be involved in that happening. There's been the guys who have gone out in Dover. That was a small demonstration to prove what was possible. The government are still not listening. There is groups all over the UK with in contact with people that are in the position that they will put things out there and get everybody ready should the requirement be to go out. Is it likely? I think it's highly unlikely that it won't happen because I can't see the government taking any notice.
And if that happens, presumably the farmers are not farming. They're not producing what they are supposed to be producing. And so that's a question in and of itself, but I wonder if the supermarket shelves start to deplete and people start to go, hang on a minute, this stuff that we shovel in our mouth is it called food? Oh, yeah, that's right. I knew it was something like that.
Yeah.
maybe they will start to go, hang on, this is actually quite important that we have this, because I'm quite hungry now and I can't function the way I used to, and actually it would be good to have that food back. Do you think this will show people that food is something that's very important, or will it make the farmers look like they are just disgruntled?
I think the two things within this from my side. When the pandemic started, food ran out really quickly in the supermarkets.
Yeah.
It is my opinion that that was just a trial to see what happened. Okay. And the reason I say that, we were running a farm shop at the time, and we went from selling £100 worth of fruit and veg and meat in the shop a day and selling 10 veg boxes per week to selling £15,000 a day in the shop and 400 veg boxes per day.
So you could have a pandemic. You'd be happy with a pandemic all the time.
We had a great time.
Yeah.
I ignored all the rules and just did what I wanted, and business was great. But the point I make is, Richard, that then there was plenty of food still coming into the country.
Right.
So despite the supermarkets running out, or I don't actually think they did, I think what happened was the supermarkets held back food deliberately so that there was a situation occurred. Okay. This time the food what we had access to will not be there. It's a lot harder to get that wholesale fruit and veg into the country now. It's not coming in, certainly from France, Spain and Holland.
Well, again, if they're protesting, they're not farming.
Absolutely. On that note, so I will come back to on that note, I spoke to a French farmer yesterday, and I said, how the hell are you still getting food to supermarkets? He said, we're still working. I said, but you're on strike. He said, Mark, a third of the farmers are on strike. And in 6 days' time, they go home and another third goes out.
Right.
He said, so there's this constant churn of farmers on the front line to keep it active. And there's a constant churn of farmers in the background still producing food. One thing he said was that they had, because of the speed and the ability they had to blockade the country, where the supermarkets couldn't respond to that, the farmers could. So the farmers could get, because of things like green lanes, like farm tracks and so forth, they could quite easily get food from one farm to another into the local town. They could set up a market on the market square, whatever that looked like. And that's what they're doing. So they're working with what they've got available to them. They're swapping it with other farms in different towns. They're then going out and making that available to small wholesalers, small independent stores, to the cafes, the restaurants. So the public are not really interfered with. They've just got having to shop in a different manner, just like they did in the pandemic. And that is where I see it. So, that is, I think, one of the key things within this. Will there be as much food as last time? No. If it happens now, we have a problem, and a severe problem, I genuinely believe. Could something be done about that challenge? Yes, in great depth. And I think, I believe you've got Catherine on tomorrow from the PFFA.
Yes.
Catherine will talk, I'm sure. Me and Catherine work very, very closely together. I know she's going to talk about the solutions to all of this from the farming community and the public side. So, but from what we've seen overseas and what I can see happening here, the organisation in the background has been to military precision. And that...
Yeah, you did tell me that an astonishing fact before we recorded, that it took something like, how long did you say it took to get the tractors out on the road and organised?
Yeah, so the Germans took 18 weeks to get the tractors out.
18 weeks?
Yes, so people are under the assumption, people, have messaged me since I've been posting a lot on social media about no farmers, no food, and people going, oh, why haven't we got the tractors out? So, well, hang on. So my part within the No Farmers, No Food campaign has been to work on the public perception of farmers, to try and get people again to understand why farmers are there, what the subsidies that they've had taken away were there for. Because people think that the subsidies that farmers got were for, to buy a new tractor or a new Range Rover. those subsidies were in place to achieve one thing: to make sure that the food on the shop shelf was at an affordable price for the consumer. Now, so what's happened is that the affordability of that has been, and the cost of that has been at the expense of the taxpayer. So that's gone to pay subsidies. And who's benefited? The farmer? No. The public? No. The supermarkets benefited from all that subsidies being spent. And so that, again, comes back to that problem. So, yeah, I think there's, but the 18-week campaign was all around, based around the fact that they needed to get the public on board, the public in a point where the public had got food in the cupboard. The perception was that the farmers needed to go out, and where we are at the moment with the farming community as a whole, whether people agree with any one of those three things I've listed under that umbrella, Richard, the farmers are affected by all of those. And that is having a huge knock-on effect. And if you're a farmer and you're in the position that you are going, well, I can take £250 an acre, I've got 100 acres, I can take this, £25,000 to get me through the next year, and I'm going to get that for the next 5 years in this scheme. I can pay for everything I've got to pay and I can get by. Or I keep farming and keep losing money. Surely the government should be paying the farmers to produce food. I hear different figures within the food industry, Richard, from 49% to 60% of the food that we produce in the UK is what's for, British consumption. I don't know about you, but I do not fancy, if food stops rolling into the country, which I know under the 2030 agenda it should. If that stops, I don't know about you, but I don't fancy cutting my diet down to 49 to 60% of what it is at present.
No.
I've had a point in my life where I had no food in the cupboard and small children that I was responsible for. And I know as a parent that I would have done anything to rectify that. I was fortunate that I had parents, other siblings around the table who could assist and help me out. If you're in a country where nobody could assist you and the whole population was in that position, what would happen? You would soon have anarchy on the streets without any doubt at all. So should the farmers go out? Yes, I think they should, personally. I think there's two sides to it. One, if the farmers go out, it might at least resolve the fact that the public do not end up having to go on the streets to scavenge food, because they'll have enough weight in the farming ability with the farmers out to draw attention to the situation and hopefully change that situation. So there has to be some changes, Rich, and I keep hearing this: enough is enough, and that's where the farming community is.
I think it's essential, really, for farmers and the public to meet, because just waxing lyrical about these old books that I used to read in the 30s, where you had small towns or villages, the farming community was the main employer.
Yes.
And you had all the other businesses that were either helping supply the boots, the jackets, the equipment, the seeds and all of that for not only the farm, but the labourers who worked on the farm, all the families and all of that. And you saw farmers, you knew who they were. They were, friendly or not friendly or get off my land, whatever it was, but you knew who they were and you could talk to, and you could also see, of course, the products that they made, and you go, well, that's so-and-so's pigs, they don't look too healthy, I'll avoid those. But we don't see that now, and I think that's something that's terribly missing. And you see, somebody in a tractor with headphones on doesn't really seem to be actually engaged with the land anymore and the soil, and we keep hearing how it's being poisoned by the various pesticides and all of that, and the runoff. And so we, the public, have become disenfranchised with them, because our only association is with this brightly coloured huge building that gives you boxes full of highly processed chemicals. And on a sweeping statement, of course, I actually go to a farm shop and buy all my meat and veg and all of that, but and many people do, but not enough. And I think getting the farmers out so that people can actually say, "Oi, do you mind moving your tractor?" And they say, "Well, actually, this is the problem." Oh, I didn't realise that. Oh, you're a farmer. Now I understand. Because we have we either got a rosy coloured idea of what a farmer is thanks to television programmes, you know, that are sort of filmed in the Yorkshire Dales, James Herriot sticking his arm up a cow's rear end, as I remember. Or we've got the sort of the angry farmer, or it's all robots and it's just a thing. So I think it is essential to make that, to get the two ends of the food chain together again, the people who eat it and the people who grow it. The least interesting is the supermarket manager and their rather dehumanized place with the cameras and the problem in the bagging area and getting rid of staff, you know, all of that.
I think so. One of the things I would say, Richard, is that, you know, you've obviously got quite a few viewers, and across the country there is a lot of small independent farms and a lot of small independent growers, like with the LWA especially, you know, what grow veg boxes, grow veg box schemes and things like that. There's a lot of care farms out there. I would encourage people to actually take the time to go to these places and actually get back to taking the time to go and talk to these, especially the smaller farms. Some of the bigger farmers, perhaps not, they don't have the time or perhaps the inclination truly to chat with the public. But I think that the smaller farmers, they're happy to tell people what's going on the farm. They're happy to tell them, you know, what crops coming up, what they've got going on in the future. You know, at the minute you're in the middle of lambing season or calving season, for instance, you know, get out there and see some of these farms and see the animals and, you know, see how well they're looked after. And that's one of the biggest things as well, Richard, that he's skipped across in all of this. British farmers have such high standards to produce to, in comparison to a lot of places in Europe. And when that produce is coming in, it's coming in at a reduced cost because their government are subsidising them. Take New Zealand lamb as a classic example. Their expertise is a lot less standard-wise than the British. The quality they have to produce meat to has to come into the UK is a lot less against what we are. And people say, well, why is New Zealand lamb always so cheap? Well, because they're subsidised to send it over. And Richard, I don't know if most people know this, and I didn't until the other day, and I was horrified. I've always assumed, as a stupid farmer here, I will say, that because I've only eaten British meat, British lamb especially, I didn't realise that when New Zealand lamb comes into UK, that it's not frozen, because I assumed if it travels for months on end to get here, that it must be frozen.
Right.
It isn't. They send it in gas sealed in containers so that it cannot deteriorate because it's in gas. So they then open it when it gets here after potentially months of being on the sea, ungas it, and at that point it then starts to obviously become stagnant meat again. So you're getting something that's potentially months old on the supermarket shelf.
Gosh.
Before you even get it. I genuinely didn't realise that. And, you know, I've always thought, well, it must be frozen. I hadn't thought otherwise about it. You know, and I hope, you know, I hope that the British public are aware of that, because I don't think they are.
No. Well, I think there's so many practices that we're not really aware of.
Yeah.
I spoke to farmer John Stone at Dora's Dairy in near Swindon, although he says he prefers it to be near Cirencester, which is much posher. And a lovely chap. He does raw milk and has a dairy there. And fortunately, he says, I don't have to deal with the supermarkets or any of that because all my customers are local.
Yeah.
And he says, you know, we just got to get back to having 6 or 7 small-scale farms around towns and villages supplying locally, seasonally, and so it's fresh. People know it, they see it, and all of that. Do you think that's feasible?
I think it's going to have to be. I think personally, Richard, that's the only way forward. Now, what I will say is I went to visit a guy called Joe Ward the other day, who's a beef farmer, and was having a conversation with him because he's on tenanted land. The land, what he's on, I won't name the estate, but he's on a big estate. 500 plus years the family has owned the estate. The estate's now going to be sold off. And it's going to be sold off because, and again, you look at this and you just got to smile. For what he pays per acre to rent the land, they can get 4 times the amount per year per acre to have it in subsidies. So these big estates who tenant out probably, I don't know, but hundreds of thousands of acres across the UK is under tenanted farms from big land estates what have been there since Doomsday. When 1066, when the poor had all the land took off them last time, and it went back to these big landowners, and a lot of that still sits in place. So a lot of these farmers you're going to find in the next year will find themselves without anywhere to farm because they're tenanted, and that is going to be a huge issue. You take someone like say like Joe. He's got a cattle herd there, to produce for beef. And, the guy's been in it since the early 80s when he set up on his own, and he's now completely lost. He's like, well, what do I do? They're going to sell the land from under me. I can't find anywhere else to go. Land is going to be worth far too much to being set aside. So that has to change, no matter what comes out of the, if tractors go out or tractors don't go out, if the No Farmers, No Food campaign is successful to work at a governmental level. There's so much has got to change, and it needs to change fast, Richard, because we've had a wet winter this year, which is going to cause 2 problems. So for us in arable East Anglia, a lot of the fields were set. The wheat, which was planted pre-winter, has rotted out in the ground. The fields are very sparse. A lot of the fields are still underwater. So that means next year there'll be no grain. There'll also be no straw. So you'll have nothing to feed the animals, which fits in nicely because then the agenda comes into play because the farmers won't be able to produce and breed the amount of animals which they've been used to breeding. So that will cut down the animals by 20-30% automatically. Farmers haven't got to make that decision. It's already made for them in the next year's forecast. So you can see how all this comes into play. And, where, like yourself, you've gone fairly well down the rabbit hole of this, with this, Richard. As have I, and I won't deny that. But mine is out of the sheer frustration to try and find out the truth and what that truth looks like. And, as a dad and a granddad, what does that look like for my kids and my grandkids? Which is my biggest concern in all of this. Of course. I'm 56. I've had a really, really good life. I've been blessed, the country that we've lived in, never known starvation, never known war. But I do think we're at the point now that could change literally on the flip of a coin. And, that does worry me, genuinely.
And it doesn't help that, and people may think this is conspiratorial, but it is on the government's website that the geoengineering, the weather control, is not helping the farmers, even though the excuse might be, oh, we've got a warming planet, so we're going to put a lot of solar panels on here so we don't have to use other fuel, but we'll dim the skies at the same time. So you're not getting the electricity,
Richard, isn't there?
I mean, it's bonkers. And then, of course, as you say, things aren't growing, and maybe rain is being manufactured to rot out the grain. Who knows? CIC, is that community interest companies?
It is, yeah. So
just to, we've only got a few minutes left, but just
so from my side, Richard, in the background, amongst everything else which I'm doing and lots of time to spare, I've set up a CIC with some other friends. That's to farm the 20 acres which I spoke about earlier. That is to help people within the farming community, the funds raised through that, and people in the food industry, or people wanting to get into the food or farming industry that can't afford to do that on their own, or might want a piece of equipment, for instance, something like that. So that's where that will fit in. And then we will have people come onto the 20 acres and like a lot more care farms do, to learn about farming, to learn about growing. We'd like to put a kitchen on so we can teach people about preserves, cooking from scratch, and get kids onto the land and get kids involved in farming again. And that's, Richard, when I went to school, we had a school garden. We had, great knowledge of the food, what was there. We had great knowledge of what we were eating. We had great knowledge in the lessons, and that's all been stripped out.
It's interesting you say that, because Hope Sussex down in Sussex, who are sort of an alternative school, if you like, they do grow their own food, and the kids grow the food there. This is really for kids who've taken their children out of school, and they do a bit of homeschooling, and they can go to this facility.
Yes.
And I think this is the future.
Absolutely.
And the more people can take their kids out of that classroom, which is under strip light with kids sitting down when really they want to be running around, and get them onto farms, because there are so many different aspects to farming that will interest kids. Yeah. They just don't know that. And Richard, that to me that's the key.
I was a nightmare at school. My parents struggled to get me into school because I just couldn't do it. You know, I'm dyslexic, can still barely read, I have to say. Learned to read when I had children of my own. I can read to hold my own, but I'm certainly not a confident reader. But I did love was going down the farm and making sure the pigs were all right, and I'd, you know, jump on the back of the pigs and have a ride round. I think it was funny and fall off, and you know,
that's what I want to do. Well, I'm 60,
but I think that's, you know, kids sit on computer games all the time now, and they don't have that physical enjoyment. You know, we all carried a knife, Richard. We all carried an air gun.
Yeah.
None of us ever hurt anybody.
No, exactly.
Ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. But I think there is, I mean, I'm personally quite hopeful that this is turning the corner of this one direction of farming. And I think, particularly with the British spirit, that, you know, more people are taking their kids out of schools.
Yeah.
They are thinking, what can I do with them? If more people are doing what you're doing, and we keep hearing about the initiatives, and of course Catherine McBean is sort of doing a lot of work in that area.
Yes.
And we can get the kids back in there, back into getting their hands in the soil, understanding what growing is, the magic of that, the magic of animals, and then having them come up with the demand that that's what they want to do. They don't want to sit in some big call centre under fluorescent light trying to sell whatever it might be. And you know, I think there is a turnaround, but we're the ones that have got to instigate that.
Absolutely. I think, you know, from my side, Richard, I think there's two things which I need to leave with, if I may. One is that this logo is of great importance to the general public. The bowler hat farmer will 100% be back on track next week to be back on the videos. I've been in bed poorly this week. So I think that there is a great opportunity for the public as we move forward to get involved in smaller, more local, more independent food supply. Getting involved in growing it, producing it, right through to eating it. And I think that's where, in my opinion, the biggest thing in all of this, Richard, is the money that the supermarkets take. That money is in the hands of the public. If the public take it away from them, they don't have it. It's as simple as that. So the public hold the key. If the public take their spending elsewhere, then everything can go, you know, in the public's favour, because the supermarkets do not work in the public's favour.
There's a book called We Want Real Food by Graham Harvey, who used to be the advisor to the Archers, and I think it came out in the 90s.
Right.
And he talks about exactly all the things you've pretty much said, apart from obviously the current situation, about highly processed food. And this came out in the 90s, and he said the key thing is to take your spending away from the supermarkets. Yeah. And because everything else will follow. And that was in the 90s, you know. It's been
and here we are.
And here we are still. But it's been a fantastic conversation, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time and telling us a little bit about what's been going on. I'm sure my audience will be absolutely on your side, and many of them are. When I do my talks, I very often ask how many people are buying from the supermarket, and a few sheepish hands go up, and then they say, well, you know, I mean, Julia and I went to a talk last night, and on the way there, we knew we weren't going to eat. We went to a farm shop and bought some burgers, which we cooked in the van, and very lovely they were. And it's not difficult, but of course, you've got to just think a little bit differently.
Yes.
And once you've mastered that thinking differently and you've not just gone to the convenience all the time, certainly you're healthier for one thing. That's something that people don't respect their health enough. And so there you are at 56, and I'm thinking, that's not old. We're all going to reach 100.
Absolutely.
We've got to, because the next generation coming up, they've got a lot to live up to.
That would worry my youngest daughter, especially if I live till I'm 100, because she thinks I'm cantankerous now.
Another 50 years. Mark, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
I hope to come up and see your operation and do an interview with you face to face as the year goes on and find out how things go.
I look forward to it.
But in the meantime, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. And I'm sure the audience will go and have a look at, and it's newly started, isn't it, your YouTube channel?
It is. I am fairly useless at technology. I can just about work my mobile phone, but a friend has sorted me out a YouTube channel called The Bowler Hat Farmer.
I'll put a link in the description.
Thank you. And on Facebook, it's under the ARC Project.
The ARC?
Yeah,
Project.
the ARC Project. So, Richard, it's been emotional. Thank you very much for your time and trouble, sir. And I look forward to hearing from you in due course.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Do check him out and follow what's going on, support the farmers and all of that. I'll be back with more monologue.